Hello everyone, welcome to K Diagnostics, Dio here. Today we have a 2007 Dodge Sprinter with a 3.0 liter. Customer complaint is that the check engine light is on. So the first thing we're gonna do, we're gonna confirm the customer's complaint and then connect the scan tool so we can find out why the check engine light came on. So let's confirm the customer's complaint. I'm gonna start the car. And as you guys can see, the check engine light remained on. So customer's complaint confirmed. So now I'm gonna turn off the car and connect the scan tool to the car so we can find out what kind of trouble codes we have in memory. Alright, so I got the scan tool connected to the car. So now let's scan it for some trouble codes. So we're gonna hit on scanner. And it is a Dodge. It's a 2007. Let's auto ID it. I'm sorry for the noise in the background, guys. I'm actually filming while everybody's here, so sorry guys. Alright, so the scan tool has identified the car. It's a 2007 Dodge Sprinter with a 3.0 liter and it's a V6. So let's click OK. And so there are a couple ways we can do this. We can go to code scan, which is going to scan all the modules on the car. But I'm just going to go straight to the engine control module. So I'm going to click here. I'm going to click on engine. And that's gonna take us straight to the engine control module. So let's go to codes. And right there, we have 3 trouble codes in memory. 2623, charge air system, offset drift at idle. And then the other one is 2355, exhaust gas recirculation control, air mass too large. And then the third one is 2209, lost communication with ABS/ESP. These are not P codes. They're kind of weird. Let's go to diagnose here and see if we're going to get any information about this code. And as you can see, code specific graph unavailable. Oh crap. So let's get out of here. Intelligent diagnostic. Okay, well, usually when you have only numbers like this, when you don't have P codes, they're usually manufacturer specific code. I don't know if they are. It looks like we have an issue with the EGR system. I mean, this one says exhaust gas recirculation control, air mass too large. So I mean, exhaust gas recirculation, that's the EGR system. And I don't know if the EGR system is actually the EGR valve is opening at the wrong time, or if it's sticking. I don't know. So let's do some digging about this one. Why don't we go to the generic side? Because we don't. I mean, I can go to service information and tap these codes in so we can see some code set criteria, or maybe it's gonna maybe we can cross these codes to the generic code, I mean the P codes that I'm mostly familiar with. But before we do that, let's go to the generic side of the scanner first. So let's end the communication with this. End communication. Let's go to OBD direct. And again, I mean, you don't have to do this, guys. You can just go straight to your service information and type those numbers. I think it was 2355. You can tap that and it's gonna pretty much tell you what it is. And I'm just curious to see what we have here. And the good thing about this side is that we also have freeze frame. So we can look at freeze frame data and see what the computer was looking at when this trouble code set. So let's click on display trouble codes first. And that's interesting. So on the OBD, on the generic side, we only have one code, which is P0101, mass or volume airflow sensor A, circuit range / performance. Well, that's good to know. At least it's giving us direction now. So we most likely have an issue with our mass airflow sensor circuit, or I guess the inlet circuit. I mean the air that enters the engine. So let's back out of here and look at freeze frame data. So what I'm interested in is engine speed, temperature, and maybe fuel pressure, because this is a diesel. We're now going to have fuel trim numbers here. So right here, it looks like this code's set at 666 engine RPM, so at idle. And then the temperature here, so it looks like an engine operating temperature, so 185 degree Fahrenheit right there. And then the fuel pressure here, fuel rail pressure PSI, 3700, so that doesn't look too bad. So mass airflow sensor. Okay, now the next step I want to take, and then this is just preference, guys. I want to look at live data. Okay, let's go here and look at some live data. Let's see what the computer is looking at. Let's see if the computer is getting any good signal or any good info coming from the mass airflow sensor. So I'm just interested, so I'm going to customize this list. I'm just interested in the mass airflow sensor data PID. So this guy right here, airflow rate, grams per second. So that's all I need. And I can also throw engine speed there so we can see the engine speed. Now let's go to list. And then, so we're gonna focus on this speed right here, and we're gonna graph this. So let's start the engine and see. Alright, so I got the engine going. So we are reading about 17 grams per second, 16 to 17 grams per second at idle. So now I'm gonna go all the way to the floor. Let's see what we're reading at wide open throttle. So at wide open throttle, we're reading about 96 grams per second. And this doesn't look too bad. I mean, I don't see any dropouts or any glitches here. And you never know, it could be intermittent. I mean, maybe it's kind of come and go, you know. I guess it could be good to take it for a test drive and monitor this mass airflow sensor PID. But before I do that, there's something else I want to do. So let me turn the engine off and let's back out of here. So at least we have some sense of direction. We know our issue is probably around the mass airflow sensor, but I'm curious about that other code we had. Remember the code we had on the OE side? The one that said something about the EGR? The 2355, that weird code. So let me go back there, and we're gonna go to service information and look those up and see if those codes are caused by this mass airflow sensor, by this mass airflow sensor code. So let's stop the communication with this. Stop communication, and let's go to scanner. And our vehicle is stored right here, so it's the most recent vehicle we just scanned. So I'm going to double click on it. Alright, so the vehicle has been identified, 2007 Dodge Sprinter. Let's click OK, and let's go to engine. I mean, I'm sorry guys if I'm going back and forth. again, diagnostic work is about 90% research and 10% actually doing the work. So we have to get familiar with these codes and really get these pieces together and find out who took out who, so we can diagnose this vehicle accurately. So I'm gonna go to service information and take these codes with me and, you know, punch them in so we can see to what code they translate to, because they most likely translate to some P codes, or we can have, you know, a sense of clarity of what they mean. So we have 26, 23, and then 2355. So let's go to our service information and find and do some research about these codes. Alright, so I'm right here at the computer. I'm sorry for the glare, guys. We're gonna select our vehicle. So let's go to vehicle selection. So the van we are working on is a 2007 Dodge Sprinter. This one is a 3.0 liter, and it's a 2500. It's a passenger van. So now let's use this vehicle. Alright, so let's tap code 2623. That was the first one. And we're gonna go here, 2623 engine. And let's go to OEM testing. Okay, so let's find that code here, 2623. So I'm actually searching through here, guys. I really apologize for the glare, guys. And I'm also sorry for the noise in the background. I'm filming while everybody is here in the shop, so the noise you hear is my coworkers working in the background. I'm sorry. So we have, here is our code, 2623. So this is pretty much what the scanner was telling us. Charge air system offset drift at idle. So let's click here. Okay. So it looks like it gives us some causes here. So these are the causes that caused this code here to set. Okay. So charge air system offset drift at idle. And the first code, the first cause is intake air system leak, wiring and connectors, intake air temperature sensor, hot film mass airflow sensor. Well, that's good to know. Well, although I wasn't really familiar with this code, but the causes actually lead us back to the mass airflow sensor code like we saw in the generic side of the scanner. So that's good to know. We probably have an issue with our mass airflow sensor. And I'm really interested in this intake air system leak, because if we have a leak between the mass airflow sensor and the intake, that's going to be unmetered air, so it's going to cause this code to come up. So let's look up the other one. Yes, 2355. So let's see. So 2355. So right here, 2355, exhaust gas recirculation control, air mass too large. So let's click on this one. And these are the possible causes. Intermittent DTC, yeah, it is probably intermittent. So mass airflow temperature sensor signal circuit shorted to voltage. and then the other cause is mass airflow sensor. So the good thing about this is that it's leading us back to the mass airflow sensor circuit, or the mass airflow sensor maybe being skewed or not operating properly. So now what we need to do, I mean, when we looked at live data, everything seemed pretty fine. But again, that is processed data. The computer is looking at the input from the mass airflow sensor. And if it's completely skewed, the computer can ignore it and just use some, default strategies that are inside the computer. But what we're gonna do is we're gonna go under the hood and do a visual inspection, check around the mass airflow sensor, and maybe we can do some tests at the mass airflow sensor itself. We can connect the scope and see the signal that's coming from the mass airflow sensor, and maybe check the ground and the power to see if everything is making it. I mean, we're gonna check power and ground at the mass airflow sensor. Or maybe there's a leak too. We're also gonna do a quick check to make sure that we don't have any leak between the mass airflow sensor and the intake, because that's gonna allow unmirrored air to enter in the engine. So let's go under the hood and do these checks. Alright, so here we are. I am here under the hood. Here's our mass airflow sensor, and everything looks pretty good here. I do not see a cracked hose. There is a gasket between this inlet tube and the turbo. Hopefully you guys I don't like how it's kind of sticking out. It's probably leaking from there. Can you guys see that? It's such a tight fit, guys. It's gonna be hard for me to show you. So I'm gonna have to remove this air filter housing and this tube so you guys can see. So it's back there. Yeah, do you see the red? Do you see the red thing over there? The red gasket? Yeah, it's sticking out of the tube. It shouldn't be that way. Maybe it slipped out a little bit. And if we have a leak there, so all the air that's coming from the air filter can be leaking out of there, or it can be drawing more air from that gasket, which is gonna, because the computer is looking at the input from this sensor. So if we have a leak on that gasket that I showed you down there, it's gonna skew the reading that's coming from this mass airflow sensor. So the computer is not gonna know. And remember, on that code, one of the possible causes was a air leak on the intake. So we can check this mass airflow sensor. We can use our lab scope to check this really quickly, or we can take this stuff off and just look at the seal and see if it's out. Maybe that's how it looks, but I'm not sure. I think it's pulled out a little bit. We are probably leaking intake air from the joint. So I'm gonna just double check. This is not really necessary, but you know, it's always good to check and double check yourself. I'm gonna make sure we have power and ground here. I believe this green wire with a yellow tracer is our signal wire, and then these other two, I believe, are ground. And actually we can pull out the wiring diagram so we can see this. So let's go and do some checks here. I'm gonna bring the lab scope. We're gonna do some checks here. If everything checks out okay, we're gonna remove this air filter box so we can look at that gasket down there. You know, it looks a little suspicious. So let's go back in the car and hook up our lab scope. Alright, so I got my lab scope leads connected to the scanner. So now let's back out of here. And I actually what I wanna do is I wanna look at the scope and data at the same time. So let's go to scope first. Let's go to scope, and then let's get a little bit familiar with this mass airflow sensor. Let's see what wire is what. 2007 Dodge Sprinter. So ours is a 3.0 lira, 2500. This is a passenger van. Now let's go to use this vehicle, and then let's do, okay, let's go to wiring diagrams, system wiring. So let's go to engine performance, and we're gonna choose our engine. This is a 3.0 liter, and we're gonna find our mass airflow sensor in this wiring diagram. Alright, so here is our mass airflow sensor, and as you can see, the dark green and yellow wire is our signal. So it says signal here, so it looks like we got two signals and two grounds. Okay, and I believe one is gonna be a power supply that gets pulled to ground. Okay, we're gonna find out once we back probe this. So wait, let's check the ground first. Let's do an out of range test here first. So I'm gonna back probe these two wires first, so the black and white. Okay, hold on, I just accidentally clicked on that sensor on that page. Okay, right here. So let's I'm going to back probe these two ground wires here. We're going to check the ground. So with the engine running, a good sensor ground should be 100 millivolt. So let's make sure we have 100 millivolt on these two wires first, and then we will check our signal wires. So I'm going to go back under the hood and back probe these two wires, these two ground wires. Alright guys, so a lab scope is just a fast multimeter. I have this yellow wire, this is going to be on the yellow trace, going through this white wire here. So 1 and 2, remember 1 and 2 on our wiring diagram were the grounds. So I'm back probing these two. Okay, and I have them grounded here on the chassis ground. Okay, so now let's go back in the van. Alright, so what I did under the hood was I back probed these two ground wires. Okay, so after back probing these, we're gonna back out of here. We're gonna go to scope multimeter, and what are we reading here? Let's drop down. Let's go to lab scope, 4 channel, and let's increase our voltage. Okay, well, it looks like our yellow trace is reading battery voltage, and then our green trace is reading, let's see what we're reading here. Our green trace is reading about 200 millivolts. So let's start it. So right here, so it looks like the yellow trace is the power supply to the sensor, and then the green trace is the ground. Let me refresh this a little bit. This ground is slightly high. See how it's jumping? I don't like how that is though. This ground is slightly high. Sensor ground like 0.2. I mean, I don't know. I guess, I don't know, we can do some more research about that one. But yeah, so we have our power supply there, we have our ground, and go back under the hood and just switch our back probes to the next two wires. So now let's back probe the signal wires and see what happens. I mean, we have determined that there's power going to our sensor, so there's power and ground going to them, but now let's just switch and back probe the signal wires. All right, so we're here under the hood again. So now what we're gonna do, we're just gonna swap these back probes here. So now we're gonna back probe this one, this wire, I mean pin 4, and we're also gonna back probe pin 3. Okay, so these two, remember, according to the wiring diagram, it says that it's got two signal wires here. So let's back probe these two and see what happened. All right, so we are back in the vehicle right now, and we are reading about 4 volts. Let's refresh this. So we're reading about 4 volts on the yellow trace, and then 5 volts on the green trace. So let's start this. Key on, engine off. It looks like we have a square wave here on the yellow trace, and kind of same thing on the green trace too. Okay, I'm gonna start it. So here's our voltage waveform. Okay, now let's go. I want to look at the frequency of this. So let's back out of here. Let's see if we can do that from here. No, we can't see the frequency. So let's back out of here and go to, oops. Let's go to multimeter. Let's go to frequency. Right there. Do you guys see that increase right there in frequency? I don't think our mass airflow sensor is the problem. This looks good. I mean, I don't see any dropouts or glitches. So at wide open throttle, we can throw some cursors here and see, but hold on. Okay, just throw some cursors. Let's show the cursors. Yeah, right here. So cursor 2. Yeah, we're reading about 2 point. No, it is 4. I'm looking at the right here. Oops. So right here, we are reading about on the so right here we are reading about 4.3 kilohertz on this. Yeah, I mean, that looks good. This here looks good. Okay, now there's one thing I want to check, just for fun, okay? Just for fun. You don't have to do this, but I guess at this point the next step is gonna be, let's go back under the hood and remove that air filter box and the cover to see if we have any leak there between the tube and the gasket that I was showing you earlier. But before we do that, let me do something just really quickly. Let me turn this off and back out of here. Let's go to OBD. Let's go to the generic side of the scanner. I want to look at data and and the scope at the same time. So let's do display current data. Let's customize this list. We just want to look at mass airflow sensor. Deselect all, mass airflow sensor, and maybe engine speed too. And let's do list, and let's graph this. So let's back out of here. Let's go to guided component test. It is a Dodge. Where is Dodge? Right here. 2007 Sprinter. Right here. Engine. Our mass airflow sensor isn't here, but let's just pick the crank sensor. So let's see. Frequency. Let's go to frequency. Let's go to kilohertz. Both. All right. So we are good. Let's go back to our data page right there, and then I'm gonna bring up the scope here too. Okay, so this is the info coming from the from the ECM, because this is processed data, and this is what we're reading straight at the sensor. So right here, look at this picture and this picture. I'm sorry, I meant look at, oh darn. So look at this picture here and this picture. So this is from the sensor and this is from the computer. And the signal looks clean. I mean, we don't have any glitches, any dropouts. Right there, you see how our signal is rising, coming back down? Look at here too. See how the signal is rising and coming back down? So right there. See this? Okay. Well, we have power, we have ground to our sensor, although the ground was slightly high, but I'm not really worried about that. Not as high as that it would really draw my attention. I wanna go under the hood again, and this time check all the tubes, that go to the air cooler. And I mean, I'm gonna start from the turbo, working my way up to the air cooler. We most likely have an air leak, or is a gasket that's not sitting properly. So let's go under the hood and do those checks. Do you see how this waveform here looks like the graph here on the scan tool? So this guy is most likely not our issue. So let's go back under the hood. Alright, so we are back here under the hood. I'm gonna disconnect these back probes. Just put them here, just put them aside. I'm gonna disconnect this mass airflow sensor and disconnect this intake temp sensor. And then we're gonna undo this clamp. I'm gonna disconnect this, and this air filter housing just pops off. We're gonna have to remove this jumper terminal here, positive terminal. Just put it aside. Now I'm just gonna pull this up. It's kind of hard to do while I'm holding the camera. Okay, so right there. So here comes our air filter box. So I'm just gonna sit it right here. Okay, so now let's see what we got. I'm suspecting a leak. I'm suspecting a leak right in there. So we're gonna have to take this cover off. This cover is gonna come off. All right, so we're gonna remove this cover. It's got some plastic torque bolts here. Then we got more right here, and this cover should be able to come off. And guess what, guys? See this right here? So this thing was completely loose. Oh my gosh, so it completely came off. So that's why it was sticking out. So it was, yeah. So this is the issue right here. Did you see that? So that's why it gave us that 2355 code. And remember, when we were looking at the code description and the possible causes, one of the possible causes was a leak in the intake system. So right here, so this is a leak. So I believe this was slightly off. I mean, it wasn't off completely, because if it were before, we would have heard it while I was revving the engine. So once I removed the air filter box, and I guess this thing just popped off. So what we're gonna do is, I'm gonna look at this gasket and make sure it looks good. I'm gonna put this back and tighten it and clear the code, and then we're gonna go on a test drive and see if these codes will come back up. So I guess that's all it was. I guess this clamp here is loose, or it slipped out or something, you know. Yeah, that's all it needs. So let's put this back together, and while we're here, we can also check other things, because sometimes we have, because this silencer, this is the intake manifold silencer, this silencer tends to leak too. There's a gasket, there's a seal in here, but this looks pretty good. So I'm going to put this back together, tighten it, and then clear the code, go on a test drive, and see what happens. Alright, so I'm gonna sit you guys there while I remove this. What's up?
What's up, Dio? Do you have an extension cord we could borrow?
Extension cord. Where are you taking it to?
Just out to where the boat is.
Okay. Well, we have an extension cord over there by the door. But just make sure you bring it back when you're done.
For sure. Hey, go subscribe to K Diagnostics.
Alright, so here's the gasket. I mean, it doesn't look too bad. You know, it's a little bit oily, but nothing to be concerned about. I'm just gonna feed it back in and tighten it again and see what happens. So I'm gonna wipe it down, because I believe it got a little bit oily. That's why it slipped out. So right there, I'm gonna put this back on. And then I hope my hands are not in the way as much. I'm gonna try to get my hands in the way. I'm gonna try to get my hands out of the way, not in the way. I'm gonna try to get my hands out of the way as much as possible. So now I'm gonna tighten this. And guys, just based on the signals we were getting from the mass airflow sensor, you know, I mean, I didn't see anything that really caught my attention. I mean, everything looked pretty good. So I knew that we didn't have an issue with our mass airflow sensor. I knew that we didn't have an issue with our mass airflow sensor based on the signal we were getting. So that's pretty tight right there. Alright, so this is not going anywhere. Alright, so this is pretty tight. The next step is gonna be, we're gonna put this cover back on, put the air filter box back on, we're gonna clear the lights and take it on a test drive. And also, I'm also gonna do a visual inspection just under the hood, because the air cooler is actually behind the radiator here. So, I mean, another disconnected line or a leaking, you know, gasket or fitting could also cause the same problem. But I believe our issue was laying just right here, you know, because remember, this thing was completely out. Now I can't even pull it out anymore. So what was happening was, so this was loose, unmetered air was entering in this tube. So because the computer looks at the signal from the mass airflow sensor, so if what the mass airflow sensor is not what the actual air is, it's gonna throw that code. So I guess in that instance, the signal coming from the mass airflow sensor becomes skewed. So we have unmetered air that was entering inside the engine. So we had more air entering the engine. So we got the cover back on. So now the next step is gonna be installing the air filter box. And this air filter box just pops in. Alright, so I got everything back together. This air tube clamp is tightened. Now I'm gonna connect this electrical connector back on, and we're gonna connect this intake air temperature sensor on. Alright, so I did a visual inspection around the engine bay. I also looked under the car. There isn't any cracked tube or any disconnected tube. The only tube that was disconnected is this one. So now I'm gonna disconnect everything I have set up here. I'm gonna get my leads out of the way. We're gonna close the hood and clear the codes. Remember, those codes set at operating temperature and at idle, so while the engine was idling. So let's go back inside the car, clear the codes, and test drive. Because we didn't replace any component. Like if we had a defective component, we could have done some, after repair test and to see the after and the before. But remember, we only had this mass airflow sensor code, and I mean, we checked the mass airflow sensor. The mass airflow sensor was checking out okay. So what we need to do now is just go back in the car, clear the code, and test drive it to see if the codes will come back. But I'm sure the codes won't come back because our problem was laying over there. So that tube, the clamp on the turbo was loose. So anyways, let's go inside the car, clear the codes, and then go on a test drive. Alright guys, so we are back in the car. Let's connect a scan tool to the car, hopefully for the last time, so we can erase the codes and go on a test drive. I'm just gonna stay on the generic side of the scanner. So let's do clear emissions related data, and yeah, that's where we can clear the codes too. So let's clear everything. And this is gonna clear everything. Okay, so now let's see if we have any trouble codes in memory. Right there, no present codes. That's good. Now when we start the car, the check engine light should go off. Now let's start the car and watch the check engine light there. And as you can see, the check engine light went off. So now we're ready to go on the test drive. And this is for just the oil change. I'm gonna have to reset this light actually. I'm gonna pull up the scanner here. I'm gonna go by myself. I don't really like looking at data and driving, but I am interested in our mass airflow sensor data PID. What's going on? Let's go to customize, deselect all. Let's just take this guy right here, graph. Well, the only difference I can see right now at wide open throttle, we are reading at least 100. Watch. Remember before it was only stopping at 99, but now we're reading 103, no, 108. So a slight difference there. I guess now all the air that's passing the mass airflow sensor is getting routed into the intake, so there is no longer a leak on the intake plenum. Yeah, so we are hitting 100, and as you can see, our check engine light is off. So I'm gonna sit the scan tool right here on the passenger side. Now, instead of putting it here on the passenger side, I can just have it here on my lap, and I'm gonna try to drive this way. So here we go. Alright, so let's take this for a spin. And here is our mass airflow sensor PID here. You're probably not gonna be able to tell, but yeah, it's, you know, it's going up and down very well. No glitches or dropout. So at the peak, we're getting up to 110 right now, 110 grams per second. So that's pretty good. All right, so we are right here on the road. The check engine light is still off. The vehicle drives fine. And I'm also looking at my mass airflow sensor data PID here on the scanner. So everything looks good. So let's keep driving. Alright, so I feel good about this fix. I mean, it didn't need much. That tube just slipped out. I'm gonna turn around somewhere here, and then we're gonna go back to the shop so we can wrap up this video. So I'll turn off the camera. I'll bring you guys back up once I'm at the shop so we can wrap this up. Alright guys, so we are back here at the shop, and everything looks fine. And remember, when we first scanned it, our code came up around this temperature. So the code set when the engine was at operating temperature around 186 degrees Fahrenheit, and the engine speed, I believe, was 666. Right now the speed is a little higher, which is 782. So we are idling, and our mass airflow sensor is reading about 17 grams per second right there. And when I accelerate, so I'm gonna go to the floor, and as you can see, at wide open throttle, sitting in park, we're reading about 103 grams per second, and the check engine light is still off. And as you guys can see, the check engine light didn't come back on. And I test drove it, you know, I went for about what, 15 to 20 minutes, and everything looks good. I feel good about this. This is fixed. Again, it didn't need any parts, just, you know, testing and finding out what the issue was. Once again, as you can see, the check engine light did not come back on. I guess this is another reason why we always do visual inspections. I mean, it's always good to do a visual inspection because that can save you a lot of time and money. So we're gonna end this here. We're gonna wrap this up. I hope you like this video. If you do, give it a thumbs up. If you don't, give it a thumb down. But if you do, you gotta tell me why. If this is your first time here, Subscribe to my YouTube channel, K Diagnostics. If you have any comments, questions, criticism, leave them in the comment box. And while you're down there, ring the bell so you can get notified every time I upload a new video. Thanks for watching. See you next time.